The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 7932 in the name of Claire Baker on National Parks unfinished business. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Claire Baker to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The establishment of national parks was one of the early achievements of this Parliament, and it was steered through by the then Labour Minister Sarah Boyack, and I am pleased that Ms Boyack is taking part in this evening's debate. This year is the 10th anniversary of the creation of the two national parks, Loch Lomond in the Trossachs and the Cairngorms National Park. The path to establishing national parks was long. Cairngorms was first proposed in the 1931 Addison Report, but it took devolution to deliver the legislation and have Scotland join the global national parks movement. There are 3,500 national parks across the world recognising and protecting areas of outstanding natural beauty. They strengthen international reputation and demonstrate a long-term commitment to the natural environment. Indeed, the Scottish model of national parks is interesting people from all over Europe, as they can see that working in partnership can deliver real change and the focus on joined-up management across conservation, the visitor experience and rural development, how important that is. We know that while Scotland has much to offer, wild mountains, pristine rivers and lochs, ancient forests, stunning coastlines and islands which are rich with wildlife and history, we also face challenges in protecting and enhancing our biodiversity, getting the right balance between different interests that does not then compromise our environment, and using land, one of Scotland's strongest resources, in a way which works in harmony with communities and supports sustainable development. I brought forward the debate this evening, and I'd like to thank the members who supported the motion enabling the debate to come forward. But I brought forward this debate to help concentrate minds on where we go next. Two parks was surely not the end of the process, and the report Unfinished Business, a National Park Strategy for Scotland, which has been prepared by the Scottish Campaign for Rural Parks and the Association of the Protection of Rural Scotland, gives a strong case for further designation, and I'd like to thank them for their work in this area. I'd also like to thank Ramblers Scotland for the briefing they prepared in advance of this debate. So our experience of existing national parks shows they can bring a wide range of environmental, social and economic benefits. The four aims of national parks, which are established in the legislation, are to conserve and enhance the natural and cultural heritage of the area, to promote the sustainable use of the area, to promote understanding and enjoyment, including enjoyment in the form of recreation, of the special qualities of the area by the public, and to promote sustainable economic and social development of the area's communities. I recently sat next to Grant Moyer, the Chief Executive of the Cairngorms National Park, at an SCDI dinner on the rural economy, and heard about the good work that Cairngorms National Park is doing, as well as some of the unavoidable challenges it faces as the lead authority for the area. But I think that some of the key challenges in our rural areas, if we look at those and think, we look at the economy, employment, sustainability, and we can then see how national parks can respond positively to all of these. They are a driver for growth. The Cairngorm area has survived the recession well. It has low unemployment, a growing population and good growth. And they recently launched a Make It Yours campaign with Cairngorms Business Partnership, where the businesses will come together to work on an innovative and interesting approach to promoting the national park brand. National parks deliver on nature conservation, and the Cairngorms Nature Action Plan shows the way forward for delivering on the 2020 challenge on biodiversity. And we all know in this chamber how challenging that will be. And national parks are also a showcase for how sustainable development can be delivered on the ground. So, if you want to look at where you can see real cutting-edge and innovative solutions, where they're being developed to take on the tricky issues that there are in rural Scotland, just take a look at our national parks. There is no dispute that the establishment of the parks in Scotland is a good thing, and the question now, after 10 years, is what's next. In 2009, the Scottish Government carried out a review of the two existing parks, but the remit of the review was fairly narrow, with a focus on the existing roles and composition. Stage 2 of the review was dropped, losing the opportunity to have a broader discussion, and although the review proposed the establishment of a ministerial-chaired national strategy group, this has not materialised. Perhaps this evening the Minister can say whether or not a ministerial strategy group will be forthcoming and what the timetable will be if that is to go ahead. I agree that a national strategy group would be helpful and would enable discussion on a forward strategy. We know we are in a time of financial constraint, and the National Parks authorities are facing a significant cut in their budget next year and the following year, so it might seem unreasonable at the moment to call for further national parks. But a strategy group would allow opportunity for future planning, allow the opportunity to set the forward path and be clear on Scotland's aspirations around national parks. The Unfinished Business Report produces a recommended list of areas they believe are suitable for designation, setting out the criteria they use to identify them. Of course, we are some way off reaching an agreement on whether there is a need for more parks, never mind determining where those parks may be, but they do provide some interesting examples. Designating the Cheviots would be an extension of the Northumberland National Park. The border between Scotland and England runs along the ridge of the Cheviot Hills, and while the southern flank is in the Northumbrian National Park, the northern side has limited protection through areas of Great Landscape Value designation. However, it can be argued that the Scotland side is more impressive, and that shouldn't be a difficult argument for the Minister to make. This would be the first cross-border park in the UK, and it has the potential to extend all the benefits of international attraction, tourism and marketing, as well as conservation interests across the border. Unfinished Business also argues for a coastal marine national park. This was the sense of direction prior to 2007, when there was a shift to a focus on the more broader marine issues, which then led to the Marine Scotland Act. In recent evidence to the RASI Committee on Climate Adaptation, concerns were raised over Scotland's soft coastline and the need for greater strategic support for coastal partnerships. The Minister might want to comment this evening on whether he sees a future for a coastal and marine national park and how that would complement other designations. The report also highlights the potential for a national park in Galloway. It would encompass the National Forest Park, which is one of only 4 dark skies parks in the Western world. Other members may wish to highlight other areas for discussion this evening. Next year will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the death of John Muir, the central figure in the worldwide national parks movement. While the debate may move on to what should or could be designated, designation is complex, and of course community consent and support is vital in going forward, while establishment of the boundaries are complex and effective governance and management are essential, and it can be tricky to get that right. But tonight's debate is not about the detail. It is, I hope, about the start of a debate on how we go forward and positively progress national parks for the future of Scotland.
Thank you very much. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. I call Christine Graham to be followed by Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate the member on securing this debate, which I supported, but the member will also be aware that I put on what I hope she would see as a friendly amendment. And with your leave later, if I could refer to that, because it is pertinent to the debate. I share her call for a Scotland-wide debate beyond these walls and this bubble with the Scottish public, but keeping within realistic funding packages, as we know we are in tight constraints. I share the sentiments of the report. Scotland's landscape ranks among the best in the world, some right in this Parliament's doorstep. We take Arthur's Seat for granted, and not far flung from here, the Pentland Hills with has that stunning, what they call a landscape signature, which lets you know you're approaching the capital city. The amendment, as you are aware, I think, Deputy Presiding Officer, notes what it considers to be the important distinction between national and regional parks, such as the Pentland Hills and Clyde Muirshield. And the distinction is very relevant because for a national park, we have, and it quotes, we have a substantial protection to the area. It has a structured and audited governance. It has substantial central government funding, although private funding is levered in. Sometimes the restrictions aren't always popular with the residents there, but I think that residents should always remember that we are lucky. They're lucky to live there. We're pleased they live there, but it is a privilege and it's for the use of generations to come. The difference with a regional park is quite substantial. These were set up in the 1960s, and the one I'm interested in, the Pentlands Regional Park, it was established in 1986, and it has a much looser governance than the national parks. It simply is a coming together of the local authorities which are bounded to fund it either in cash or kind by providing wardens or some funding to maintain and do exactly, to some extent, the same things as the national parks, ensuring that the public can use it responsibly, repairing paths, assisting to some with businesses, but it's a less structured. It's not really got a structured governance, and it doesn't really have central government input input comes via local authorities. Their funding is also at a pinch point. The problem with the regional park, the Pentlands Regional Park, was when it was set up at the time of regional authorities, the borders and what was then the Clydesdale did not come into it. And what has happened is that only 43% of it is protected. So I'm actually, may publicise the fact that I'm intending to have a bill to extend the boundary of the regional park to take in the southern part, which would bring in another 2 local authorities. And before I scare the horses, I'm making the distinction between a national park, which is regulated in planning, and rightly so, and a regional park which has very limited protection, because I know that some parties in the Pentlands Regional Park are frightened of becoming a national park, perhaps in one leap, but I do think that certainly the protection of a regional park should be there, although it's a lesser protection. Further than that, I want to say that there is no intention for me to alter the constitution as such of the regional park, but I would like the debate which the member has rightly brought about national parks to embrace regional parks and indeed national areas of scenic beauty. I mean, it's a very mixed bag of designations and definitions. And I think if we're going to look at protecting Scotland's landscape, we must sort of bring these together in any debate so we understand how they interlock, how there's different functions, and to put them in language that the public will understand so that we all benefit from the landscape around us, particularly as the built landscape begins to encroach on it even more and more. So I congratulate the member on the debate. I hope she doesn't mind me introducing regional parks to it, because I do think they're very much linked together, and I don't think many people know about regional parks and the distinction between these and national parks. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call Sarah Boyack to be followed by Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I first of all congratulate Claire Baker for bringing this debate tonight and welcome the publication by the SCNP and APRS for their report Unfinished Business. It is great to be debating national parks as members' business. It actually was our first members' debate in the new Scottish Parliament in 1999. There had been a long-standing campaign for a national park in Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, but there was less of a consensus in the Cairngorms area. In fact, in the early days of this Parliament, there was opposition from some. And I think our national parks are one of the success stories of devolution. The legislative process through the Lords would have been a huge challenge, so it was one of Donald Dewar's first priorities and featured in the first programme for government. And I believe our national parks have been a success. In fact, such a success that they led to the extension to include Highland Perthshire. And I think the work was partly a tribute to the success of the work of the National Park Authority, led by Jane Hope as its first Chief Executive. And I want to pay tribute to her contribution because she didn't just lead the park for nearly a decade, but she was also the lead official in the Bill team in '99 and did an excellent job then too. But as Claire Baker observed, although we had debates in the last term of the Scottish Parliament, there's really been no serious work done by the Scottish Government to progress the National Parks agenda in terms of new designations since 2007. And now really is a good time for us to come back to this agenda. Both parks have passed their 10th anniversaries, and now would be a good time to learn from their successes and to learn the lessons for the future. We should be picking up the agenda argued for by the Scottish Campaign for National Parks and the APRS. It is truly unfinished business, and the Ramblers are right to point to the centenary of the birth of John Muir as a good time to kick-start this agenda for the future. The first 2 national parks were never meant to be Scotland's only national parks. They were our top priorities then in terms of effort and funding. And I think Claire Baker is right to say we now need a ministerial lead to look to the future, because there is a long set-up time from thinking about a national park to actually designating a national park. And I'm sure there would be competing interests both for and against designations across the country, and there is a debate to be had about resources. But I believe that is a debate we need to be having now and not put it off to the future, because the benefits of active management and protection, yes I will.
Minister.
Thanks, Sarah Boyack, for taking an intervention. I won't take too much time. I just wonder, in the remaining part of her speech, if she recognises the resource issue, if she could say to me whether she has a view as to whether we should risk disappointing communities by setting opportunities up and then having them fall because we don't have sufficient resource.
Sarah Boyack, and I'll give you your time back.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, that's why we need a ministerial lead, because there have been lots of suggestions for different national parks in different parts of the country over the years. The SNH report, for one, suggested a whole number of national parks. Ministers could set the term for that debate. Are we looking at on-land national parks? Are we looking at the coastal marine parks that Claire Baker mentioned? So I think ministers could set that framework. You could set the expectations. But the alternative between doing absolutely nothing and waiting for a long time, I think, is a choice we shouldn't have to make. The integrated planning and management by public bodies and work with park communities and businesses mean that there are good lessons to be learnt, and we're missing out by not taking this debate forward. We should be looking to the future, and that's why I support a ministerially-led National Parks Strategy Group to set a framework for the future, to set realistic expectations, of course, but let's not miss out on the huge benefits that come from national parks. We're not doing that at the moment. I thought Claire Baker's suggestion about the Cheviots was a fascinating suggestion. There will be arguments for and against, but let's get back to the discussion. It's something that shouldn't be for the future. It's a discussion for now. And for all the conflicts there have been with our two national parks, there have been fantastic achievements. And that's a debate we need to bring into the Parliament and engage third parties and all those who've got a real interest across the country. We will always have a limited amount of money, but surely the benefits and the lessons that have been learnt from the first decade are an opportunity that we should be seizing in 2014. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. I now call Alex Ferguson to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by, like other members, joining congratulating Claire Baker in securing this debate this evening. Having sat on the Rural Affairs Committee from 1999, I was obviously heavily involved during the earliest consideration of national parks within this Parliament, and I can say without any doubt at all that the title of Claire Baker's motion, and indeed the report on which it is based, is absolutely correct. National Parks Unfinished Business precisely and directly sums up where I think we are today. Having been a committee member as the original legislation which paved the way for national parks was scrutinised and eventually passed, I then had the very considerable honour and great pleasure of convening the committee as the creation of Scotland's 2 national parks was implemented. And at no time, as Claire Baker, I think, pointed out, during either the scrutiny of the legislation or the consequent creation of the Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and Trossachs national parks was it ever suggested or recommended that they should be Scotland's only national parks. So unfinished business is exactly where we currently stand, Presiding Officer. The enthusiasm and commitment that I had witnessed during the process and passage of the legislation, during which the committee travelled to both the proposed areas to take evidence, was, frankly, awe-inspiring. And so impressed was I at what I'd seen and heard that I went into the 2003 election pledging that if I won the constituency vote, I would campaign for Scotland's 3rd national park to be the Galloway National Park. And it's on that topic that I want to focus for some brief remarks for the remainder of the time that's left to me. Now, as it happened, I did win that election, and I duly set about drawing various potentially interested stakeholders together to discuss the prospects for the creation of a Galloway National Park. And I take no pleasure at all in reporting that the only support I received was from the Federation of Small Businesses in Dumfries and Galloway. The Council, the Forestry Commission, Visit Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, Dumfries and Galloway, as it then was, SNH and others were all, frankly, at best lukewarm, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the prospect was more or less dead in the water. Now, hope reared its optimistic head once again when the then administration, as was again mentioned, took a look at the possibility of creating a marine national park. And I think there were 7 proposed sites possibly across Scotland, of which the Solway Firth, again in Dumfries and Galloway, was the only one within which significant local objections were not raised. And again, I flagged up the potential for the possibility of the creation of a land and marine-based national park, something which the Scottish Campaign for National Parks very much supported at that time, and I think still do. Again, as has been mentioned, the incoming administration following the 2007 election ditched the idea of marine national parks, and until now, other than the process that was already mentioned, not an awful lot more has been said about national parks of any description. Now, you might well ask, Presiding Officer, why on earth I would wish to return to the subject of a possible Galloway National Park after 2 pretty robust rejections. Well, other than the fact that I'm a born optimist, it's extraordinary, Presiding Officer, how attitudes have changed in a decade. So, some of the agencies that previously rejected the possibility have now very much changed their opinion. Significantly, Dumfries and Galloway Council, which has been joined by the ever-increasingly influential Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce. The idea is still strongly supported by the Federation of Small Businesses, as well as many local business associations, community associations and other community bodies to which I have spoken. Ever since the M74 was built, and I actually suspect long before that, the people of Dumfries and Galloway have desperately sought something that will get people travelling north on the motorway network to turn left at Gretna. And I have never changed my original view that a Galloway National Park would bring that about. Such a national park is recommended in the excellent report on which this debate is based, and I commend both organisations for bringing that report forward. I wholeheartedly support the report, the suggestion of a Galloway National Park, and indeed the motion that is before us this evening. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. And I now call Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm glad to be here this evening to welcome the publication of the National Park Strategy for Scotland, and I'd like to thank my colleague Claire Baker as well for securing this debate, which seems very timely. I would also like to support the remarks of both Sarah Boyack and Alex Ferguson, who have been here from the start of these issues and have put that reflection on the debate as well. The report being titled Unfinished Business, which I believe is indeed apt for this issue, points to the vast network of natural landscapes which should be an ideal setting for a number of national parks, although there are only 2 currently. And I understand that out of the designation of 15 across the UK. So I do believe the time has come for us to add to that number of 2. This has been the case It has been the case that Labour introduced the National Parks Act in 2000, and time has indeed moved on since then. According to the report, the expert recommendation is that the Scottish landscape should be able to support 4 or 5 national parks, perhaps more. The report points out that neither of the national parks that are in existence already are, as my colleague Claire Baker has stated, on a marine or coastal involve marine or coastal features. And I would certainly agree with the argument that there should at least be 1 additional national park allocated to a suitable area of the Scottish coastline, considering Scotland has such a rich coastal environment. And perhaps, I would say this as I'm a South Scotland MSP, but perhaps the Solway Firth might be an option. In the 3rd term of the Scottish Parliament, at stakeholder meetings in Dumfries, one of which I attended, a marine national park was mooted there. And that meeting, just that one meeting, demonstrated to me how clearly the model will allow stakeholders, including local authority, inshore fishermen, tourism providers and NGOs to come together to allow an early resolution of any potential conflicts and to support a sustainable way forward for the precious marine environment and marine biodiversity. The benefits of expanding national parks cannot be underestimated. The protection granted to these spaces ensures that the natural environment is handled with greater care, allowing biodiversity to develop and providing essential green carbon sinks which will help tackle climate change. Partnership working involving local communities is a fine model of sustainable development in action and also supports the rural economy in a sustainable way. In the Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park, for example, great efforts have been made to preserve the water vole population, and there are plans underway to create the largest native woodland in Scotland. With regards to climate change, the Cairngorms National Park has been running an initiative to encourage local residents to switch to wood as their fuel, a carbon-neutral fuel source. As my colleague Claire Baker highlighted, on the issue of potential new parks at the eastern part of my region, I have been made aware by constituents of an interesting proposal related to this area, where the National Park Strategy was discussed at a public meeting in Yetholm. John Mayhew from the Scottish Campaign for National Parks and the Association for the Preservation of Rural Scotland raised the idea of a Scottish Cheviot Park. And importantly, the proposal suggested that the new project could be linked, as Claire Baker has stressed, to the existing Northumberland National Park, and this reaches right up to the Scottish border. This proposal makes not only geographical sense, but economic sense, creating more tourism opportunities in the borders, and the environmental drivers such as biodiversity and a social sense for rural communities are also important. And it also demonstrates the possibility of good cross-border working. So I support and congratulate Claire Baker again on taking forward this and hope to hear from the Minister about a possible review. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I now invite Paul Wheelhouse to respond to the debate. Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And there have indeed been many interesting and positive contributions made about national parks in Scotland in this members' debate, and I congratulate Claire Baker for bringing it to the attention of the Chamber today. Much has been said today about the successes of our 2 existing national parks, and I fully endorse such remarks. Scotland's national parks are 2 of our greatest national assets, and I fully recognise their success that have been outlined by Claire Baker, Sarah Boyack, indeed Gloria Beamish and indeed Alex Ferguson and Christine Graham. They are very important assets for Scotland, and I fully recognise their success in protecting species and habitats, promoting tourism, providing social and economic benefits to communities they serve and to the rest of the country. Recently, I have had the pleasure of chairing 2 meetings with the national parks and their partners to review progress with their latest 5-year partnership plans. And I have been struck by the extent to which both national parks have a broad range of partners in the public, private and third sector who they are working with to deliver both locally and on a national scale. I have also, in turning to the report, the Unfinished Business Report, I'd like to let members know that I have met with the Scottish Campaign for National Parks and indeed the Association for the Protection of Rural Scotland at the beginning of September. And that meeting included both Charles Strang of the SPRS, who actually lives in Yetholm in the Scottish borders and was particularly passionate about the Cheviots as a candidate, and also Mr Mayhew himself to discuss the report. We did have a candid exchange of views on the report's main recommendations, and I welcome the opportunity provided by Claire Baker's motion to share my views with members today. First, there is the proposition in the report, Unfinished Business, repeated in the motion that there should be a long-term national strategy for future national parks in Scotland. I'd like to say that I fully understand where the Scottish Campaign for National Parks and the Association for Protection of Rural Scotland are coming from in this. Nearly half of the report sets out the trials and tribulations of the national park movement in Scotland over the last 65 years. The very language used, as Alex Ferguson picked up, the long struggle and unfinished business, says it all. They think there is a lot of catching up to do, and I acknowledge that. This is why they are now calling for a long-term strategy in which at least 7 areas of Scotland are earmarked for future national park status. There are, however, 2 main reasons why I cannot agree to such a strategy at this time. The first is about resources in the current economic climate. It cannot have escaped the attention of the SCNP and APRS that these are difficult times and that there are considerable pressures in public finances at present. We have suffered an 11% drop in our resource budget and a 26% cut in capital. And as members have acknowledged, we simply do not have the resources for new national park authorities at this time, which of course would include both set-up costs and the recurrent costs thereafter. Second, while I appreciate this will disappoint SCNP, as I've said to them directly, I do not think that the suggestion of earmarking areas for possible future national park status is a good one at this time. The report says we consider... I will take an intervention. Yep,
Claire Baker.
For taking intervention. I've also had meetings with John Maynard and others interested in it. My impression was more that they were keen for the debate to be on the table. And when you look at the report, when they talk about order of designation, they say that they would consider a pragmatic approach should be taken. So I don't get the impression they're calling for all 7 parks to be designated. I think they're asking that we decide on a long-term future and give some kind of commitment that there will be future designations, and maybe some concentration on the order in which that might be.
Minister.
I would look for guidance, Presiding Officer, on whether I get that time back. But
you will,
certainly the point I understand, and I'm hopefully going to come on to explain the issue about the wider strategy. The report does consider that it says we consider that a pragmatic approach should be taken to the order in which the above areas are designated, the ones that have been listed by Claire Baker, recognise there will inevitably be wide variations in the rate at which local support grows. Now, this seems to me to be a somewhat unsatisfactory approach, but I'd like to explain why, because I appreciate that may concern a member. In essence, it suggests that areas be identified for possible future designation, and the Scottish Government sense is that there would be a real danger. It would then encourage the various communities to engage in a quasi-bidding process to demonstrate support for seeking national park status. And I don't think this is a process that was envisaged in the National Parks Scotland Act 2000. Clearly, I acknowledge Sarah Boyack's close involvement in that. I do not think this is what members would want either. I think such an approach would be somewhat irresponsible too, because it would create expectations for designation and inevitably lead to disappointment for those that weren't selected. And I know there was considerable disappointment in Harris, for example, when it was not designated as a national park. I would now like to say a word or two about the SNP's national park commitment in our 2011 manifesto, which a number of members I'm sure will be aware of, but have not been directly raised today. The point that I would like to make is that this is a commitment to engage in discussion with communities. It is not a commitment to declare a national strategy and let communities respond to that. Returning to the experience in Harris, I think, is instructive. In 2009, the community in Harris voted in favour of pursuing national park status as a means of addressing population decline and lack of employment. However, the then Environment Minister, Rosanna Cunningham, made it clear that she would not consider such designation unless the local authority was supportive. In 2010, the Western Isles Council conducted a thorough year-long study of all aspects of what was proposed, for example, the role of any Harris National Park in relation to planning. But the Council concluded a convincing case had not been made for national park status for Harris. Indeed, the Scottish Government felt, I'm really short of time unless the presiding officer gives me some messages.
I will allow you the extra time if you wish, Minister. Christine Graham.
I don't want to jump in again with my amendment. Would the Minister's officials engage with Pentland Regional Park Forum? They're not looking for money, so you should be happy about that. But if you'd engage with them just to see the ways forward and allay their fears about what a regional park means as opposed to a national park, if his officials would even do it, if he's too busy.
Minister.
On that point, I mean, as the member knows, I've written to Christine Graham on this issue. The key issue is really the support of local authorities for the extension to the regional park boundary. I think it's for the member to make the case to the communities and to the local authorities as to what a regional park, national park makes. But I can certainly confirm that a regional park is a different beast from a national park, and indeed we strongly support the work of the Pentland Regional Park and indeed Clyde and Muirshiel in terms of what they do. But returning to the issue of the national parks, in terms of the Council's view, they concluded that a convincing case for national park status had not been made in relation to Harris. And the Scottish Government felt at the time the best outcome for Harris community was not necessarily a national park. Hence, subsequently, Highlands and Isles Enterprise has already provided assistance to Harris, for example, in supporting a £1.2 million Heritage Lottery Fund landscape partnership to Harris Hotel, Hotel Hebrides, Kildare Cruises, Harris Golf Club, Fishery Piers and the community shop to deliver the economic benefits that were sought in terms of a designation for Harris. Finally, I'm aware that the focus of SCNP and APRS is very much on a national park, primarily as a designation for protecting landscape. Now, while I recognise the strong calls for that, it seems to me they have something rather different in mind from the model this Parliament agreed, where the fourth aim of national parks is to promote sustainable economic and social development of the area's communities, and which, in balance with the other aims, the parks have been achieving very successfully, as members have indicated, over the past 10 years. Presiding Officer, I fully recognise and welcome the support for the concept of national parks, and I have no doubt the members in national parks themselves, those working in the parks and those stakeholders involved with it will very much welcome the support from Parliament today for their work and the successes they've achieved. But I would like to end by just acknowledging that the national parks themselves contribute in excess of £260 million to local economies and attract over 5 million visitors per year, and they are very positive players in terms of our conservation and biodiversity objectives. Investments in the parks, including for shovel-ready projects over recent years, reflect the economic importance and our continued commitment to enhancing facilities for visitors, supporting green tourism and creating new employment opportunities. And at this time, our priority is to make sure those two national parks are as successful as they can be and not risk the financial health of both of them by looking at other additional parks, which would probably raise expectation among communities only to be disappointed at the end of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes Claire Baker's members' debate national parks unfinished business, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.